Welcome to Brant Community Church. Glad to have all of you here. My name's Dave, and I'm the lead pastor here. And if you're here for the first time, we're so glad to have you here. And if you've been here for 2 or 3 times, keep coming back. We love having you as part of our community. Well, this morning I want to tell a story, and it's the story of an average Canadian. Her name is Marcy O'Connor. If you say, I've never heard of her, that's true. You probably haven't, because she's just an average Canadian. She's 47 years old. She's divorced. She's a freelance writer who lives in Montreal with her 2 sons when they're not with their father. Her social life is very full. She works in a very busy office with really good coworkers. They lunch together often. They sometimes go out for drinks after work is over. She visits family and friends in Toronto on a very regular basis. And in Montreal, she has made some new friends, and they go out fairly often. She's involved in some community causes, which she's passionate about. Her life is full and busy, and there are lots of people around, and she would be the last person that you would ever think would talk about loneliness. Her story was one of a few stories that was in a documentary that the CBC did, a mini sort of documentary on the whole idea of loneliness in Canada. And her story is one of those stories. She experienced the intensity of loneliness so badly that she actually sought out a counselor, professional help, to help her deal with it. And here are some of the things that she said as part of that documentary. She said, I think it's probably always been there. She's talking about loneliness. It's just a matter of not feeling connected enough to people in those ways where I could reach out for help or support or whatever it may be. She goes on, I'm not alone. I have my mom and my brother who I'm close with, and I have my kids who I spend as much time as possible with. So I think I almost felt like, where did that feeling come from? And what does it say about these other relationships I have with people? That in spite of having them in my life, I feel lonely. And she joined a gym, and she became part of a fitness class instead of hiking all by herself. She took her dog now to a dog park where there are other dog owners, just so that she could connect with some others. And this is what she went on to say. We're not used to talking about it, loneliness. We're not used to be using the word. And if you do, there's a stigma. It is so true. If I was to talk about grief, people would nod and understand and sympathize. But loneliness is just this horrible word still. And that is so true. She said that who wants to be a friend of someone who says, I'm lonely? It's like there's something wrong with you. There's something weird about you. I don't want to be your friend. And she said there's this stigma that is attached to it. But it was the last thing that she said on the interview that caught my attention. This is what she said. I can't change the loneliness, but the choice I have is just to sort of breathe and accept it and say, okay, what can I do now? It's there. What can I do now? Now, I don't know about you, but that's a pretty sad resignation that I'm lonely and there's very little that I can do about it. Just Google these words. The epidemic of loneliness, and you will see thousands of sites that use that word in some sort of article or some sort of documentary. The epidemic of loneliness. Now, I don't know about you, but when I think about the phrase epidemic, I think of the AIDS outbreak in Africa a few years ago, or I think of SARS, or I think of things like malaria or influenza, but not loneliness. I don't think loneliness is an epidemic until I looked up those words, epidemic and loneliness. Here's what they say. An epidemic is defined as a widespread occurrence of some kind of disease in a culture or community at a specific time. And I thought, is loneliness that kind of disease that is inflicting our community today? And loneliness is defined as being alone or cut off from others, producing feelings of sadness, bleakness, or desolation. Again, that seems to be true. And so there is this culture of loneliness, this epidemic of loneliness that has captured the hearts of so many people. I mean, think about all the songs that have been written about loneliness. Now, most of them are going to be country songs where somebody's leaving, but, think about the songs. I Googled loneliness, and I was looking for other things, and I came across a site that said 98 of the best songs about loneliness. And I thought, really? There are best songs about loneliness? But think about them. One is The Loneliest Number. Eleanor Rigby. Oh, look at all the lonely people. Are you lonesome tonight? Only the lonely. Mr. Lonely. The Piano Man. They drink a drink called loneliness. And I mean, these songs talk about that. And our culture has concluded that loneliness is an epidemic. A growing percentage of the population are claiming they are lonely. In fact, in a survey done in Canada around this documentary, in 2018, 22% of the people in Canada claimed that they were lonely regularly or lots of the time. Often they felt the lack of companionship, they felt all alone, they felt left out and isolated. That's more than 1 in 5 people. The survey claims that loneliness is one of the key reasons for the increase of anxiety and depression and anger, issues of anger and issues of irritability. It says that loneliness prolonged will increase your risk of heart disease or stroke or metastatic cancer or Alzheimer's disease. Some experts have argued that loneliness is as harmful as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. More people are feeling lonely and more experience the destructive side of this epidemic. And just one of the other factors that I came across that really jumped out at me is that when it comes to men on that survey, 35% of men said that they were incredibly lonely. I think one of the greatest fears is that we openly admit it. I think we're afraid to say, well, I'm lonely. I'm afraid to say I'm all alone. I don't feel connected with other human beings. I think we're afraid to admit it to ourselves, and I think we're afraid to admit it to others. But let me ask you this morning, do you occasionally or often feel lonely? At the beginning of recorded history, God shared his thoughts about loneliness and the downsides and the destructive nature of it, that loneliness was not a good thing. God had his initial creation, and God looks at that creation. You see, God's not lonely because he lives in community, Father, Son, and Spirit. But God, who is in community, looks at his initial creation, and he sees this man, and he sees him naming the animals, and every one of the animals has a mate, has a companion, someone they connect with. And this man he's there, and there is no one for him to connect with. And this is God speaking, and it says, the Lord God said, it is not good. It's not good for the man to be alone. That could be it not good for man or women to be alone. And God says, I'm going to make a helper suitable for him. The word helper here is not subservient. It's not someone who's lesser. In fact, the only time that word helper is used in the Old Testament is to refer to God as our helper. Other than this, I'm going to make someone who complements, someone who completes them, someone who is a companion to them. You see, here's the reality. Here's the reality. You and I were created by God for genuine community. We were not created for loneliness. And that's why when we feel loneliness, we feel the hunger of loneliness. We feel like something is missing because we weren't created for that. Last week, we looked at the first of the reasons why on earth are we here, and we learned that God has created us to worship him. But the second part of the reason that God put us here on this earth, it wasn't just to worship him, but it was that we were created for genuine community. And it makes perfect sense because Jesus boiled 2 commandments down. all of 614 commandments down to 2 commandments. And he said, we are to love the Lord our God with all our heart, all our mind, all our soul, and all our strength. And then he said, and we are to love others as we love ourselves, love our neighbor, love those who are closest to us. You see, we were created to love God through worship, but we are created to love others, to create this bond of community. This bond of community. And we know this longing for community. We know we were created for it because one of the 5 key questions of life is this one: where do I belong? Where do I fit in? Where do I connect? Who do I connect with? And when that question does not get asked or answered in the right way, there is those pangs of loneliness. You know, many people have lots of people around them, at work, at home, at church, at the club, a sport they play, and they would never consider themselves lonely. Yet, Marcy O'Connor, an average Canadian with lots of people in her relational Rolodex, still feels lonely. It's not the number of people in your world. It's who you connect with. You see, we are not talking about who we contact. We're talking about who we connect with. We're not talking about who we associate with. We're talking about who we assimilate with. We're not talking about who we interact with. We're talking about those whose lives intersect our lives. Too many of us have confused contact with connection, and association with assimilation, and interaction with intersection. And we've concluded that association and contact and interaction, having enough of that, we shouldn't be lonely, and yet we are. What we used to call an acquaintance, a contact, an associate, we now call friend. We so often misuse that word friend today, and I think the reason we've misused it is because we're afraid to say, well, I have no friends, because it used to be friends were those close, deep connections, but now they're not near as close and not near as deep, and we've watered down the word. I checked my Facebook profile in preparation for this message. It tells me I have 1,584 friends. Wow, am I ever lucky. I couldn't be lonely, right, with that many friends? True confession. Church ministry and leading in church ministry is one of the loneliest jobs in the world. Because the cure for loneliness is to connect at such a deep and personal level. But when you're leading a community of faith, sometimes as leaders we think, if they really knew who I was, the things that I struggle with on the inside, below the surface, they wouldn't think I was qualified. And so people in my role tend to keep their distance. And there are times that I have felt that awful emptiness of feeling lonely. And my guess is, some of you do have too. You know what that feels like. Let me say something that's really important. For some of you who are going to look for an excuse to say, I can't be lonely. Family alone is not enough to fill the void of loneliness. It helps, but it's not enough. Because I think it's that we expect them to connect with us so that we're not lonely. But we are wired to be connected beyond family. Connection outside of the biological blood that we're connected with others through. And some of us feel sometimes like the man that's in this one writing. It says, there was a man all alone. There was a woman all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There were no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? That's what aloneness does. It deprives ourselves of enjoyment. And he says this lack of a connection is meaningless. It's miserable business. And some of us have been part of that business. And so that we're clear what I mean by community, because it would be easy to water that word down. It would be easy to water the idea of connecting with one another. I want it to be crystal clear what I mean when I talk about genuine relational connectedness, when I talk about genuine community. And there are these 4 little phrases that I use to describe community. The first phrase is this: genuine community is to love and to be loved. I'm not talking about romantic or sexual love. I'm not even talking about the love between 2 family members or friends. I'm talking a love that is much deeper, that has no strings attached, a love that does not have to be initiated, but someone else initiates it. I'm talking about a love with no grudges, that seeks nothing in return, where we give 100% of ourselves to the other, a love that is patient and kind and forgiving, a love where we'll go out of our way for another. You see, I think because of the misuse of the word love and the misunderstandings and the labels we have attached to love today, we are afraid in church community to look at our brothers and sisters in the eye and say, I love you. We don't want it to be misunderstood. But yet we need that kind of love to deeply connect outside of family. We need to be able to love like that, but we need to be loved like that. The second phrase is this: genuine community is to know and be known. What I mean here is this is about people knowing who you are below the mask. This is a few people that know who you are beneath the surface. They know your hurts and your wounds and your addictions and your brokenness and your traumas. These are the people who know what makes you happy and what makes you sad, what gives you joy, what brings you peace, what discourages you. We need to be known that deeply in a safe place where souls and hearts connect, taking off the mask, being real, climbing out from under the cliches that I'm good, I'm fine, I'm okay. It's a place where we don't need to pretend. We need to be known, and we need to know others just like that. Genuine community is, thirdly, to celebrate and be celebrated. I love this. I don't think we celebrate each other well enough. And part of celebration is congratulations. And part of celebration is the whole idea. It's the whole idea where I'm somebody's cheerleader, where I affirm them, where I tell them how good they're doing, where I'm not envious or jealous of what they do or what they have. I don't have the wrong motives. It's just affirming, building up, high-fiving one another. We all need to celebrate others and be celebrated ourselves. And the final one, we all need this: to care and be cared for. You know, when your life turns upside down and the bottom drops out and a marriage is on the rocks, or you lose your job, or you're struggling with some sort of health-related issue, or something relational, or something hurts so bad inside, we all need someone to walk with us, but we also need to walk with others. You can never just do the one half. You can never just be the receiver and receive community. You have to receive and you have to give, and we need that in the areas of care. It's where we're willing to walk with one another. And this is what I mean by community: to love and be loved, to know and be known, to celebrate and be celebrated, to care and be cared for. I want to show you what I think a lot of people live like today. It's like this. This is them. And these are all the people in the relational world. They may have thousands of people all connected to varying circles and to varying sizes of circle and to varying degrees. However, what you notice about these circles is that they have contact, but they don't connect. They're associated, but there's not assimilation. That's not what we're talking about. That's not enough. That will leave us lonely. This is what it's got to look like when the two circles overlap and intersect with one another. This is what we were created for by God. We were not created for loneliness. We are created for connection. You see, here's why connection is so important with other human beings. Because it is then that we most reflect who God is. It is there where we are most show that we were created in the image of God, a God who lives in community with all the benefits of community, Father, Son, and Spirit. And when we join in community, we reflect who God is. And the more we reflect who God is, the more we get into what I would call the zone of blessing, and the better life is. When we connect like this, we are connected with one another, but it seems to be this communion that we have with a God who lives in community, and that's where life is lived to its best. But this can be a huge challenge because we live in a culture of isolation, and social media is driving us further and further to that. We live in a culture of individualism. We live in a culture where me is way more important than we, that my rights are way more important, whether I trample on the rights of any others, and where my happiness is the most important thing. And if it wrecks someone's life, who cares? It's all about me. And that seems to be in our culture, embedded in the thinking. And it creates a huge barrier to connection when it's all about you. You don't do this very well when it's all about you, where the me is more important than the we. God did not create us to live like that, but God created us to live like this. And the reason he created us to live this way, because he knew the benefits that we get out of genuinely connecting with a few other human beings. First benefit is this, that it challenges and empowers us to be more like Jesus. Right? Jesus is the perfect human. We need one another to inspire us, to spur us on, as the writer says, to love and good deeds. We need others who will challenge us to live these 5 purposes out, to live by the teachings of Jesus, to look more like Jesus, to correct and challenge one another when we're not living that way. One of my favorite verses, this is a little bit of a different translation, but it says this: you use steel to sharpen steel, and one friend sharpens another. We need these people who are relationally connected with to sharpen us, to challenge us, to empower us to be more like Jesus. I was in one of these little communities, and one of the members of that community, I won't mention his name, but he was in one of this little community, and he was kind of coasting through his spiritual journey. He was a good social guy, but he was coasting through, and our leader of that little community, he was rough and tough, and he could tell it as he is. And I remember one day he pounded the table, and he looked the guy in the eye and said, "You're nothing but a lazy Christian." I thought, I hope he doesn't look at me next. Like, really? And that guy was so upset. I got back to my office, and he called me right away and said, "I'm not going to take that." And I said these words to him: "Was it true?" He said, "Yes. But," and I can look back to that as being a clear sort of kick in the pants that moved that guy so forward so quickly. Sometimes we need that, don't we? To challenge us. The second thing it does is it fuels us emotionally. We need that, because life can drain us emotionally. The things of life, the challenges we face, the circumstances can drill big holes in the emotional bucket. And it's in the community with a few people as they walk alongside us. When they're compassionate, they help us deal with the losses. They help us fill up the tank. It's people that we mourn together with, but we laugh together with. They fuel us emotionally. We need that. We need that. Thirdly, I've talked about this, so I'm going to talk about this at the end, but it provides a safe place to be real. Sometimes we just need a safe place to be who we are, to not have to use the cliches, to not have to pretend, to share our secrets. We all need that because it's necessary for healing. Another benefit is that it is a place for accountability. We need accountability because there are times in our lives we need those people to challenge us when we're going down a road and there's going to be a detour that we take that's going to be dangerous and destructive. We need those who will hold us accountable. When we say we're going to do something, they say, "Did you do it?" We don't move forward and we don't grow until those who are willing to hold us accountable and we're willing to be truthful to them. It says this, whoever heeds life-giving correction will be at home among the wise. Those who disregard discipline despise themselves, but the one who heeds correction gains understanding. And this is a deep word of wisdom and fullness of life. We need accountability. It also provides wisdom and insight for critical decisions. I had this clear sense of calling to go into ministry back about 27 years ago, a little bit longer. And I remember those little band of brothers that I was in this little community with, and I remember sharing with them and trying to get their advice and their guidance. And they listened and they gave feedback and they challenged my thinking. And the cool thing is a couple of them weren't sure that I should, which kind of scared me. I thought, what do they see that I don't? But the other thing is they stood with me when I said, I think it is. And we need that. We need at these critical decision points of our lives. We need to have those who say, let me speak in. Let me speak into your life. It says the way of fools seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice. Without good direction, people lose their way. The more wise counsel you follow, the better your chances. We need that. And then lastly, the benefit is it balances our lives. If we live in a culture that is more moving towards isolation, individualism, me is more important than we, my rights, my happiness, my whatever, in order to balance us from going down those roads ourselves, we need a little community that brings that balance, where it's about us, not me, where it's about not isolating. It's not just about me as an individual. My happiness and their happiness are interconnected. We all need that to balance us. And I would call these relationships providential relationships. Providential. It's as if God orchestrated them. It's as if God put them in our pathway. It's as if God put it together and organized that we would find them, so that we would experience all these benefits. And as I say, I've experienced this a few times, but I experienced it more than ever, and I was blessed to find that. 35 years ago, a famous for one-goal hockey player named Paul Henderson was speaking at a golf tournament. And he was talking about this little community of men that were gathering to grow in their spiritual life and to grow as men. And he was at this golf tournament, he was speaking, and at the end he said, hey, is anybody interested? You can talk to me after. And I ran up there because I didn't want anyone in front of me, because I was still about me, not about we. And I was the only guy that talked to him. And he invited me out, and over the next 3 years, we spent time together, and we grew together. And it was life-changing for me. In fact, I don't think I would be in ministry today if it hadn't been for those guys. I just don't. I've said that often to Sue. This group of guys spoke truth into my life. They challenged my thinking. They encouraged me. They held me accountable in how I treated my wife and my kids and about my faith. They prayed for me and walked with me. And I still connect with a few of them. 4 of them, there used to be 5 of them, but one of them passed away. But there are 4 guys that I still connect with, not as often as sometimes I would like, and I'm sure they feel the same, but maybe not. But I love to connect with these guys. Paul Henderson is one of those guys. Scott Jacks is one of those guys. Jim Turnbull is one of those guys. And Andy Tulloch is one of those guys. These are the guys. These were my band of brothers. And I can't imagine doing life without them, especially those 3 years. I can't imagine where my life would be. And so the question is, who in your world is like that? Do you have that? Do you long for it? And the question you might be asking is, where do I find it? Well, let's talk about that for a minute. It says in Matthew chapter 16, Jesus came to a region. Matthew's recording this. He's watching it happen. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, a very Roman area, he asked his disciples, kind of takes a poll. Who do people say the Son of Man is? Like, what's the word on the street? And they replied, some say John the Baptist. He had been already put to death. Others say Elijah. Some, and still others, Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. That's who they think you are. And Jesus then looked them in the eye and said, okay, who do you think? You've been up close and personal. You've had a front row seat to my teaching and my miracles in my life. Who do you think I am? And they said, Simon Peter answered, because he's always the first guy to have his hand up. Pick me. He said, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. For this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. He says, you got it right. And then Jesus says these words, and I tell you that you are Peter. He changes Simon's name to Peter. Petros means rock. And on this rock, your declaration of the Messiah, I will build my ecclesia, my church, this gathering for a purpose. See, the word church or ecclesia, it was not a Christian word. It was just a word about gathering for a purpose. And he said, the gates of Hades will not overcome it. Nothing will stand in its way. And Jesus had this dream of this thing called the church that would have all of the benefits that I talked about for one another, that people would look through the fence and see this thing called the church and say, I don't agree with what they believe. I don't get what they're all about. But whatever's going on in that community, I want to be part of it. Desperately be part of it. You see, I really believe that it is the church that we were created for to find community. It was within church. Now, hold on to your hats, those of you who are going, time out, foul. I've been in church a long time and never felt the kind of community you're talking about. And maybe that's true, and maybe you're saying to yourself, you know what? It's got to be the church's fault. They're just not living out as Jesus said they should, or it's got to be my fault. It's got to be one or the other because I've not experienced it. I don't think it's either fault. I think it's our understanding of what church is all about and what it really means. It is not a building we attend. It is a community that we connect with. And we need to understand that it's not a single phase of how we connect. It's not. You see, the church is not a single circle of which we connect in. It's not a single group of which we connect with. It looks something like this. The church has 5 circles. And outside is the outer circle, and these are your potential relationships. You show up here, and if you connect with all the people that call BCC their church home, there's like 500 people. They're your potential relationships. That's the fishing pond. But if you show up Sunday morning and just keep it at that level, you will not feel the connection that you're longing for because you don't find that connection at potential relationships. The second is the primary relationships. You say hi. You have coffee together in the cafe. You might even have dinner once in a while together. Those are primary relationships. And the chances are those are about 30 to 50 people. Doesn't matter how big this group is, that's only going to be about 30 to 50 people. These are primary relationships. You kind of know them by name. You've had a little bit of a social connection. And it goes a little bit deeper to practical relationships. This is where we start to care for one another, try to help one another, be there for one another. And for that, it's probably 20 to 30 people at max. And then they have personal relationships in church community or whatever it looks like, whatever church looks like for you, this gathering of people. This is your small group of people, 6 to 12 people. That is your personal relationship. That's where you start to peel off the mask only a little. See this? That's what you get to see. But we start to do that. And this is our small groups. This is where small groups are all about. Now, I know some of you are saying, oh, hey, I was in a small group. I didn't experience community. And that's where small groups take a bad rap. Because they're not going to give us the relational connectedness that I've described this morning. Because there's one more circle, and it's the pivotal relationships. And this is 2 or 3 people. And in here, You can find a big group, smaller group, smaller group, smaller group. But this is the group where we connect and where we grow. And this little arrow says, this is the process that we need to take. This is where life gets better. This is where our lives change when we get to this circle. When we get to this circle. Here's what I want to tell you. This is so important. The only way you move from here to here is to intentionally choose to do it. If you wait for someone else to invite you down another circle, it may not happen. We need to initiate. We need to make the choice. We need to take the steps. Often people will say to me, I just can't connect in church community. And my first question is, what serving team are you on? And what small group are you a part of? And they say neither. And that keeps you out here in the primary relationship circle. And you will never feel the connection you're longing for. It reminds me of the grade 8 graduation I went to. It's surprising I can even remember it. It was in Toronto. We had Burger King for the meal. Went to a classy school. And I remember after the meal was served, all the boys sat on one side of the room and all the girls sat on the other. And we just looked at each other thinking, oh, I wish one of them would walk across the room and ask me to dance. Ask me to dance. And the boys were saying that, and the girls were saying that, and they were both complaining the other was stuck up. And a couple of guys or a couple of girls, I don't remember how it played out, but they took a chance. They walked across the room and they asked the question. That's how we connect in community. That's how we do this dance together, is that we have the courage to walk across the room and take the initiative. And I know you can say, but I'm an introvert and I'm shy and I'm quiet. And yes, that's who you are. But it's maybe asking God to give you the courage to walk across the room. I want to wrap up, and everybody knows when I say that, that means I got like 6 minutes to go. But I want to look at a picture of this, because sometimes it kind of feels like theory, but I want to look at a picture of this. And this is what I would call the biblically functioning community. It's found in Acts chapter 2, 42 to 47. This is the snapshot of the first church. This is the church when it was a living organism before it became an organized thing. And look what it says. They worshiped and the word of God ruled, the worship and the word of God ruled their daily lives. This is the first thing it describes. Look what it says. They devoted themselves, they stuck like glue to, that's what it means, themselves to what? The apostles' teaching. They didn't have a Bible. Bible didn't come for like another 275 years. All they had was the teachings of Jesus that these eyewitnesses had in their brain and had learned and told and retold. They had the apostles' teaching, and they had fellowship, the connection together. The breaking of bread and prayer was their worship. The word of God and their worship of God is what dictated the choices that they made, the relationships, their priorities, how they did life. You see, to be this kind of biblically functioning community in the various layers, we need to know one thing is really important, that Christ is the head of the church. Now, this is where we get confused, because we have learned to say that head in the first century means the same as head in the 21st century. We think that this idea of head means boss in the 21st century, so it must mean boss in the first century. It doesn't. The word kephale means the source of life. It is the source of life. And the head is one who gives life. Jesus must be the life-giving head of the community. Do you know how I know that? Because this is how it describes the head. Husbands, love your wives as what? Christ loved the church and gave himself for it, wanting it to be a radiant and beautiful bride for himself. That's headship. It's life-giving flow. And Jesus has to be the head of our church. He has to be the one that gives life to the community. You see, it was the teaching and the worship that kind of directed everything they did. Everything they did. And that had to be first. The second picture is that it was a spirit-filled community. It says this, everyone was filled with awe. Outsiders looked in and went, whoa, what's going on here? The many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. You see, I believe it's when the Spirit of God, so we have the Word of God, Jesus is the head, but we have the Spirit of God that is working among us. I don't know about you, but last Sunday at the close of the service, I felt the Spirit of God moving. When we had our prayer time, 42 people showed up Wednesday night to pray. I felt the Spirit of God moving. That is so critical. And the Spirit of God is not static. The Spirit of God is fresh and energetic and creative and dynamic and unpredictable. And so when the Spirit of God fills a community, it's not status quo. It's not going through the motions. It's watching the Spirit of God miraculously change lives. It's the Holy Spirit that changes brokenness of the past and freedom from addictions and brings radical love and care and compassion, helps us to break free from compulsive behaviors. You know, it's about that constant restoration and rebuilding. It is the Spirit of God that does this. And when people look on, they go, something's happening there. People's lives are changing. The third thing that characterized this and is part of this picture is that there was unity and harmony. All the believers were together. That is the word of unity. They were together around their beliefs about who Jesus and God was. They were in unity around about the direction that they needed to take and the mission that they needed to fulfill. And they had everything in common. This is the harmony word. You have to have both unity and harmony. They're not the same. Unity is around certain things. Harmony is when you take diversity and you bring it together and it sounds beautiful. It's taking notes that are scattered all over and working them together so you have beautiful music. That's harmony. You need both unity around mission and harmony in community. And these people were willing to fight for this in a significant way. I mean, what a church. This first one was diversity. Romans, Jews, other nations, men, women, old, young, rich, poor. In culture, they were enemies. In the church, they were a community together. And we need to have unity, and we need to have harmony. The next is they were committed to caring for each other. They sold property and possessions to give to everyone who had a need. I mean, they looked at how God had blessed, not for their consumption, not for their, stockpiling, but to be used for themselves to meet their needs and then shared to meet the needs of others. They had such a loving heart towards one another. They were devoted. They had this sincere love. They were attentive to one another's needs. They prayed together. They walked together. They cared together. Next, they met regularly or frequently. Look what it says. Every day, they continued to meet together in the temple courts. This was the large group. They did it daily. Our culture does not allow for that. And we get that. Their culture did. But it's not about how often they met. It's about the commitment to frequency. And they were committed to it. And then lastly, they would get real with one another in small settings. It says this. They broke bread in their homes. That's not about kind of communion. That's just enjoying dinner together. Bread was the basic staple of diet. They broke bread in their homes and they ate together how? With glad and what? Sincere hearts. The word sincere means there's nothing hidden beneath the surface. It means not hypocritical. They got real with one another. They got real about their hurts and about their wounds and about their tears, and they probably did it in smaller settings within the larger setting. But they got to know one another because it was safe and they were genuine and open, transparent, and they wiped each other's tears and calmed each other's fears. And this whole picture is the picture of community. But I think what caught the attention most of people who didn't agree with what they believed in, but were taken by what they saw. Here's what I believe. It was this last one. It was this last one. It's this. They got real. See, that's what we need to work towards in small settings, because here's what we do to one another. How are you doing? Good. How's your world? Fine. How are things? Couldn't be better. Inside we're going, lie, lie, lie. because we know that's not the truth. We know we're hurting and are wounded and are empty and lonely, and we pretend. And the disconnect between the mask we're wearing and the heart we're experiencing is wrecking some of us. And I believe all of us need this safe place, maybe just a few providential friends, a little band of brothers or sisters, where we can be real with one another, to be there for one another, to be that safe place to tell the truth. Turn your attention to the screen.